Hello everyone. This semester I have had the opportunity to sit in on and observe a Head Start classroom at Long Early Learning Center in Abilene, Texas. The students in this classroom, along with their teacher, Miss B, have been very welcoming and adaptable to my presence in their classroom. As I previously mentioned, this is a Head Start classroom, which essentially means that all of the children in this class qualify to be here because of their parent or guardian's low income status. In this specific classroom, there are 8 boys and 9 girls. They are young, mostly 3 years old, with a few 4-year-olds mixed in. When looking at the students' race and ethnicity, 11 of them are Hispanic, 3 are white, 2 are black, and 1 is biracial. None of the students are military children, and none of them are bilingual. Out of the 17 children, there have already been 6 that have referrals for services, most of which are speech, but no one is currently receiving services. Lastly, all but 1 are completely potty trained, which is such a win for Miss B and her classroom aide. Over the past few weeks that I have been observing Miss B's class, I have also been reading chapters 7 and 8 of Challenging Behavior in Young Children, Understanding, Preventing, and Responding Effectively by Barbara Kaiser and Judy Resminski. This presentation will show the 5 most important connections that I made from each chapter to Miss B's classroom management and teaching. Starting with Chapter 7, the first connection to Chapter 7 is to the quote, "While they're learning self-control, young children rely heavily on the external environment, including their teachers and peers, to help them," which can be found on page 123 of Kaiser and Resminski. In Miss B's classroom, the students understand that when they are feeling strong emotions, Miss B will help give them the language they need to explain what is going on. Students are not afraid to rely on her to manage or mediate their feelings and interactions. Despite the challenging behaviors that occur sometimes in this classroom, the children have fantastic support from their teacher and classroom aide. It is also amazing to see how eager children in the class are to comfort their peers and guide them through some challenging behaviors. A strategy that I might use to help teach my students self-control is the Tea Party strategy on page 64 and 65 of the Kindness Curriculum, Stop Bullying Before It Starts by Judith Ann Rice. This strategy would involve multiple students as well as myself in order to fully understand how impactful self-control can be. You essentially set up a tea party for your students and get to practice good manners, polite conversation, and gentle interactions. The second connection to Chapter 7 is to the quote, "Pairing a more socially skilled child with one who is less skillful can be particularly effective." Heimel, Wagner, and Butler, 1990, which can be found on page 133 of Kaiser and Resminski. In Miss B's class, there is a young girl who is nonverbal. Having a nonverbal student in the class that I am observing has been an interesting experience. I have observed that there are many things Miss B does to support this child in the classroom, in the hallways, and on the playground. Whenever we walk in the halls, Miss B has one of the 2 peers hold this child's hand or the classroom aide. The child usually ends up walking with one of the 2 peers because they keep her walking at the same pace as the class and encourage her to keep going. These 2 more socially skilled peers are also the ones that play with the child at center time and on the playground, which can be seen in the images. Miss B has also made a point to sit said child right in front of her on the carpet and near more socially skilled peers. The third connection that I made to Chapter 7 is to the quote, "In the same way, a warm and responsive relationship with a teacher assists a child in regulating his emotions," which can be found on page 138 of Kaiser and Rasminski. Last week, I was able to observe Miss B playing with one of her little girls on the carpet. This specific student typically struggles with paying attention, pouting, and some other challenging behavior. It was beneficial to see the warmth that Miss B was giving her, which included hugs, letting the young girl climb all over her, and undivided attention during center play. A few minutes went by before Miss B noticed that I was watching them. Miss B explained to me that she knows there is a lack of attention for the little girl at home with 3 other siblings and another baby on the way. This is why she makes it a point to give her students responsive and, when she can, one-on-one attention. A strategy that I think I could use in my future classroom to encourage a warm and responsive relationship with my students is the strategy Me on page 71 of Transition Time, Let's Do Something Different by Gene Feldman. This is basically a little poem that I would say to children whenever I feel like they may need some assistance in calming down or regulating their emotions. It is a way to reassure students that they are loved, appreciated, and pretty special to the class. The fourth connection that I made to Chapter 7 is to the quote, "Perhaps the most basic strategy when it comes to self-regulation is helping children identify their own emotions, both positive and negative," which can be found on page 138 of Kaiser and Razminsky. In Miss B's classroom, I have heard her help children identify both positive and negative emotions. Emotions are big and can be difficult for children to understand. When a student comes to her with an intense emotion, she gets on their level and speaks to them with assertiveness. One of the first things she does is guide them through a breathing exercise before she gives them the language they need to express their emotions to themselves or to a peer. Miss B questions them about how their body is feeling, what is happening in their mind, and what happened to cause this reaction in order to determine what emotion the child might be experiencing. A strategy that I might use to help my students identify their emotions is the emotions picture file on page 67 of the Peaceful Classroom, 162 Easy Activities to Teach Preschoolers Compassion and Cooperation by Charles A. Smith, PhD. This activity will give my future students the language they need to identify and understand their complex emotions. There are numerous ways that this activity could be implemented, but the one version I think could be most beneficial to my students looks like the following. After students have gathered at circle time, the teacher will hold up pictures and ask the children how that person feels and why they think that. The teacher should guide students through noticing their facial expressions, gestures, and other features noticed in the image. The fifth and final connection that I made to Chapter 7 is to the quote, "An assertive response can protect a child from being victimized, and an assertive overture can enable a child with challenging behavior to get what he wants without resorting to aggression. When all the children learn these skills, they help one another reinforce each other's assertive behavior and avoid blaming or stigmatizing anyone," which can be found on page 144 of Kaiser and Razminsky. One of the most important things that I have observed is how Miss B confidently and assertively gives her students the language they need to communicate their emotions to their peers. This language quickly prevents most challenging behavior from occurring in the classroom because the students are able to verbalize how they are feeling and put their stop hand up, as the student is demonstrating in the photo, before any behavior gets too physical. Moving on to Chapter 8. The first connection that I made to Chapter 8 is to the quote, "To cultivate independence and autonomy and help children develop self-regulation skills, arrange the space so that they can choose activities and materials for themselves," which can be found on page 150 of Kaiser and Razminsky. In Miss B's classroom, most of the centers are filled with various materials to encourage her students' independence and freedom to choose when it comes to center time. Although there are many materials to choose from, these 3-year-olds still get upset when the item they want to play with is taken. Miss B gets to take this opportunity to help her students develop self-regulation skills such as calming down, refocusing after an upsetting situation, and impulse control. Over the past 5 weeks of observing Miss B's class, I have noticed that her kids have become increasingly more independent in their self-regulation skills, especially when it comes to situations involving centers and center materials. As can be seen here, Miss B has multiple materials available in this one specific station, but children are only able to get out a few at a time in order to not cause chaos on the carpet. The second connection that I made to Chapter 8 is to the quote, "It therefore makes sense to control the number of children who can play in each area. The size of the space, the activity, and the availability of materials, and the chemistry of the participating children are all factors in the equation," which can be found on page 152 of Kaiser and Razminsky. Miss B does this by placing a specific number of die-cut people next to each center. On each die-cut person, there is a hook for the children to hang their center tag on. This tag, which can be seen on the left, has a picture of them on it. When the hooks are filled, no one else can come to the center. Miss B knows that her students can only handle so many people in a center before they become overwhelmed and stressed. However, there are still moments in which these children get upset about a center being full and want to move a peer's tag in order for them to be able to use the center. A strategy that I found and I think could be useful in controlling the number of students in an area is the waiting list strategy on page 17 of Transition Time, Let's Do Something Different by Gene Feldman. After my time in the classroom at Long, I have found that children often get frustrated when a center is full. This strategy would allow for the children to indicate that they want next at the center without having to physically wait by the center. This strategy is very simple, and all you need is a clipboard, paper, and a pencil. The waiting list will be placed next to the most popular center or centers, and you as a teacher should discuss taking turns and the limits on the center. The teacher will be the one to write the students' names on the list if they are unable to do so themselves. Once someone leaves the center, they should tell the teacher or look at the list in order to figure out who gets the next turn inside of the center. The third connection that I made to Chapter 8 is to the quote, "It's wise to introduce just a few procedures at a time. On the opening day of school, start with those the children need first, putting away their belongings, entering and leaving the classroom, going to the bathroom, getting help, and asking questions," which can be found on pages 154 and 155 of Kaiser and Razminsky. Miss B let us know from day one she has been teaching her kids the procedures for the classroom. That is why their transitions are so smooth compared to other classes. Miss B's students all have the morning procedures down to a T. All the kids know to move their magnet with their face on it from home to school, go do their popcorn name, take their jacket and backpack off, and then hang those things up. After all of that is complete, then they may go play with the centers that are open or toys that have been set out. A strategy that I found and think could be helpful to add to my future classroom is the morning matchup on page 17 of Transition Tips and Tricks for Teachers by Jess Feldman. This activity has many variations and can help to nurture a child's reading skills as well as build up a routine. The teacher will place every student's picture in a pocket chart. Next to the chart will be a bin filled with strips of paper that have each child's name on them. Children will need to find their name and place it by their picture. This can also be done with birthdays, phone numbers, addresses, etc. The fourth connection that I made to Chapter 8 is to the quote, "The materials you choose for your classroom facilitate play and at the same time influence children's behavior. Too many toys and activities breed confusion, but too few create conflict," which can be found on page 162 of Kaiser and Razminsky. In Miss B's classroom, facilitating play while also influencing children's behavior has many different characteristics. Her centers have designated amounts of children that are allowed in them. There are specific centers that are closed to them during some of her center times. And lastly, during soft centers in the morning, Miss B is the only one who selects what is going to be put out for the kids to play with. The students know not to touch anything that has not been put out for them, and I have yet to hear any complaints about it. The fifth and final connection that I made to Chapter 8 is to the quote, "Some children need your attention more frequently than others. Instead of waiting until they demand it, plan regular check-in times for them to ask questions. Show what they're doing or simply touch base," which can be found on page 164 of Kaiser and Razminsky. From what I have observed, Miss B is excellent about noticing when specific children need more attention than others or than they usually need themselves. As each child enters the classroom, Miss B is intentional with asking them questions about their siblings, parents' feelings that morning, and many other things. Miss B also makes a point to go around to all of the centers in the room and play or interact with the students who are playing alone. She wants to make sure that they are not playing alone for a reason other than that the child wants to play that by themselves. Thank you so much for watching, and just to add, all media releases were verified for all of the children in these photos.